This is the kind of moment that can redraw a war in a single night. Reports of explosions across key areas in Iran are not just another headline, and the part that should make everyone stop is this. When B-52 bombers start appearing over a battlefield like this, it usually means someone believes the sky has already been broken open. That is not a small escalation. That is a message, a military message, a political message. And maybe the clearest sign yet that this conflict is moving into a far more dangerous phase than most people realize. Because this is not just about the blasts themselves. It is about what kind of aircraft is being used, what kind of confidence that requires, and what it says about the state of Iranian defenses right now. A B-52 is not a stealth jet slipping in quietly. It is a giant, old, loud, visible, heavy, and built to carry massive destructive power over long distances. If these bombers are striking or supporting strikes connected to operations over Iran, then the bigger story is not just what was hit. The bigger story is why commanders believe they can use that kind of aircraft in the first place. And that is where this gets serious fast. For weeks, the conflict has been building through missile launches, drone attacks, strikes on military infrastructure, attacks tied to logistics corridors, threats to oil flows, and constant warnings that the region was edging toward a much wider war. But the introduction of B-52 operations changes how this story feels. It suggests the fight may have moved beyond short, sharp punishment and into something more systematic, more confident, and much harder to reverse. That matters because air power is not just about dropping bombs. It is about control. Control of timing, control of movement, control of pressure. When one side believes it can send heavy bombers into or over hostile territory, that suggests it sees windows of dominance in the air. In simple terms, it means commanders may believe they can fly, strike, and leave without being stopped in a reliable way. And if that is true, Iran is not just dealing with explosions on the ground. It is dealing with a shrinking ability to hide, move, rebuild, and signal strength. If you want real breakdowns instead of surface-level noise, stay with this, because the next layer matters even more than the explosions themselves. The question now is not only what got hit, it is what this signals about the entire shape of the war. Reports and analysis around recent operations have pointed to a pattern. This has not looked like random punishment. It has looked like a deliberate campaign aimed at weakening Iran's military system piece by piece. Darts, facilities, bridges, transfer corridors. The goal in a campaign like that is not just destruction. The goal is paralysis. Think about it like this. A military does not run on slogans. It runs on movement. Missiles need to be transported. Launchers need to be repositioned. Radar systems need to talk to command centers. Spare parts need to move. Fuel needs to arrive. Orders need to survive pressure. If strikes start cutting roads, railways, production sites, storage areas, and the systems that defend them, then the battlefield changes even before the biggest targets fall. A military under that kind of pressure starts fighting slower, shorter, and more blindly. And this is where the B-52 becomes more than a bomber. It becomes a symbol of confidence. Not because it is futuristic, but because it is brutally practical. It can carry large payloads. It can stay relevant in a campaign built around repeated pressure. It can support a strategy that says we are not just trying to send a warning. We are trying to grind down the machinery of response. That does not mean every report is immediately confirmed. It does mean the use of this platform points to a bigger operational mindset. What analysts would notice immediately is the shift in posture. In the early phase of a conflict, you expect standoff weapons, stealth platforms, careful probing, and constant concern about enemy air defenses. Later, if one side believes it has degraded those defenses enough, the menu expands. Heavier aircraft enter. Patterns broaden. The side with the advantage starts acting less like it is testing the battlefield and more like it is managing it. That is why these explosions matter beyond the blast radius. If the strikes are linked to a campaign that now includes visible heavy bombers over Iranian territory, then this is not just an event. It is a statement that somebody thinks the threshold has already been crossed. And before we go further, drop your view in the comments. Do you think this is controlled pressure or the beginning of a far wider escalation? Now, look at the Iranian side of the equation, because this is where the picture gets more dangerous, not less. Even if Iranian air defenses have been degraded, that does not mean Iran is powerless. Far from it. Iran still has missiles. Iran still has drones. Iran still has regional partners, proxy networks, and the ability to hit shipping, energy infrastructure, and nearby countries. So, when people hear the phrase control of the sky, they sometimes imagine the war is is basically over. It is not. Control of the sky is a huge advantage, but it does not cancel out the ability to retaliate in other ways. In fact, that may be exactly what makes this stage so unstable. If Iran feels it is losing freedom of action in the air, it may lean even harder on what it still has. Ballistic missiles, drone swarms, maritime disruption, pressure on regional energy nodes, threats to Gulf shipping, strikes through partners. That kind of shift can make the war feel more chaotic to civilians and markets, even while one side appears to be gaining military control overhead. And this is why the Strait of Hormuz keeps coming back into the conversation. It is one of those narrow passages that sounds technical until you realize what it means. A huge share of the world's oil moves through that channel in normal times. One tight waterway, one pressure point, one place where military threats can become global economic pain almost overnight. If the fighting pushes harder into energy infrastructure or shipping routes, the consequences go far beyond Iran, Israel, or the Gulf. Fuel prices jump, insurance costs rise, panic. Governments get dragged in whether they want to or not. That is the deeper problem. A B-52 strike story sounds like a battlefield story. But underneath it, this is also an energy story, a shipping story, and a global stability story. The explosions are local. The shock waves are not. And there is another layer most people miss. Heavy bombers do not just hit targets. They also change calculations in capitals far away from the battlefield. Allies hear the message. Adversaries hear the message. Neutral states hear it too. If Washington is willing to employ B-52s in and around this campaign, that tells the region the United States is not just posturing from a distance. It is signaling staying power. It is signaling escalation capacity. And it is telling Iran that time may not be working in its favor. If you are still here, subscribe for more clear breakdowns, because this story keeps getting bigger the closer you look at it. Now let's get tactical, because this is where the smoke on the map starts to mean something concrete. Reports tied to recent operations have pointed towards strikes not only on major military sites, but also on the connective tissue of Iran's war effort. Bridges that help move equipment west. Rail links that connect major cities and support transfer of military material. Military-linked industrial locations tied to missiles, aviation, naval systems, and support infrastructure. That is a very specific type of pressure. It says the objective is not just to destroy what exists now. It is to slow what can be built, moved, repaired, or launched next. That approach has a clear logic. If you can make launchers harder to move, you reduce surprise. If you can degrade transport routes, you create delays. If you can hit air defenses, you open corridors. If you can strike facilities tied to missile production or support, you chip away at replenishment. Over time, the enemy is forced to choose between protecting what is left, moving assets in riskier ways, or absorbing more losses. None of those options are good, and this is why overland B-52 use matters. A heavy bomber flying over a country is not just carrying weapons. It is taking advantage of an environment shaped by previous strikes. It is operating in the shadow of degraded radars, damaged launchers, disrupted command chains, and repeated attacks on support sites. That does not mean the risk is gone. It means the risk is being judged as manageable. In warfare, that judgment says a lot. But here is where things change. The more openly one side acts from a position of confidence, the more pressure the other side feels to prove it can still impose costs. That can lead to the most dangerous type of retaliation, the kind driven by necessity rather than choice. Not necessarily because it will win, but because failing to respond may look even worse. For Iran, that could mean more missile launches, more drone attacks, more pressure on regional states, or more attempts to threaten shipping and energy targets. And once that starts, civilian fear rises fast. Power disruptions, port threats, fires at industrial sites, damage near transport routes. Rumors spread quicker than facts. Markets react before governments even finish their briefings. In a conflict like this, perception becomes part of the battlefield. A strike does not only destroy what it hits, it also sends a psychological wave through populations, investors, commanders, and rival states. Stay with me, because the most important part is not what blew up. It is what kind of war this could become next. There is also a political clock running beneath all of this. Publicly, leaders may talk about negotiations, pressure, red lines, pauses, off-ramps, and possible ceasefire windows. But military action tells you what they really think about time. And right now, the military pattern suggests urgency, not calm. It suggests that even while diplomacy is discussed, both sides still believe they need leverage. In war, leverage usually means pain. That is why reports of possible ceasefire efforts do not automatically make this safer. Sometimes they make it more dangerous in the short term. Why? Because each side wants to shape the battlefield before talks begin. Hit one more route, disable one more battery, fire one more wave, prove one more point. Enter negotiations from higher ground. So, paradoxically, moments when diplomacy seems closest can also be moments when strikes intensify. If that sounds contradictory, it is because war is full of contradictions. A country can be losing freedom in the air and still threaten the region. Another country can look militarily dominant and still fear what comes next. A side can strike harder because it wants peace on its terms, while the other side retaliates harder because accepting those terms would look like surrender. That is the trap. And this conflict is now close enough to several major fault lines that a trap like that can pull in far more than the original combatants. One of those fault lines is civilian infrastructure. Once leaders begin openly threatening energy systems, water systems, export hubs, and other vital networks, the war moves into darker territory. That is no longer only about uniformed forces on military sites. That is about pressure on the parts of a country that keep daily life functioning. And the moment that kind of infrastructure becomes central to coercion, the human and political cost rises sharply. This is also where the moral picture gets harder. Military planners may argue that certain sites support missile production, naval operations, or war logistics. Their critics will argue that the civilian spillover is too high. Both pressures collide in real time. The more essential the target, the more powerful the effect. But also, the greater the risk of broader suffering, deeper outrage, and long-term blowback. If you want the real story, not just the loudest headline, keep following this one closely because the next moves may matter more than the strikes already reported. Now widen the frame again. Imagine being a Gulf government watching this unfold. You are not just watching Iran get hit. You are watching your own infrastructure, ports, desalination plants, oil facilities, and cities become possible pressure points. You are watching missiles and drones turn geography into vulnerability. You are calculating how long your air defenses can hold, how shipping insurers will react, how energy customers will respond, and whether your own population is prepared for disruption. That is why even countries not directly at the center of the fighting can be deeply shaken by what happens on one night of heavy strikes. This is also why every report of attacks near industrial zones or transport arteries gets so much attention. These are the nerves of a modern state. Cut enough of them and the state may still stand, but it starts moving like an injured body. Slower, less coordinated, more panicked, more dependent on improvisation. And that matters enormously in a war where response speed can decide whether the next missile launch happens or fails. But there is another twist, and it may be the most unsettling one of all. Sometimes a campaign looks powerful precisely because it is nearing its most difficult phase. Early in a war, the targets are obvious. Air defenses, fixed sites, known depots. Later, the surviving systems are the harder ones. Mobile launchers, hidden storage, dispersed networks, underground workarounds, political will. That means a side can appear to be dominating and still face the hardest problem, turning battlefield advantage into a stable outcome. That is why the site or report of B-52 involvement can cut two ways. On one hand, it screams confidence and scale. On the other, it can suggest that commanders believe only sustained heavy pressure will achieve the effect they want. And sustained heavy pressure is exactly what can make a war spread, not shrinks. At this point, the central question is simple. Are these strikes designed to force a climb down, or are they the prelude to a longer campaign of strategic dismantling? Because those are two very different futures. One leads toward bargaining after shock. The other leads toward grinding confrontation with rising regional risk. And this is the part most people miss. Wars often become more dangerous after the illusion of clarity appears. When one side starts looking clearly stronger, observers assume the ending is near. But the side under pressure may then reach for its most disruptive tools. Not because they are elegant, because they are available. Let me know what you think this signals, because the next phase may depend less on who looks stronger and more on who still believes they can change the story. There is also the matter of credibility. Once heavy bombers, repeated strikes, and public threats are all in play, backing down becomes harder for everyone. For Washington, using this level of force and signaling this much reach raises expectations. If it stops too early, critics will say the pressure was wasted. If it goes too far, critics will say it opened the door to a regional fire. For Iran, absorbing that pressure without a visible answer risks looking weakened at home and across its network. So both sides become trapped by the image they are projecting. That image matters. Wars are fought with steel, but also with perception. The side that appears determined may deter others. The side that appears wounded but defiant may still rally support. The side that appears reckless may lose partners. Every explosion over key areas in Iran is part of that contest. Every launch, every plume of smoke, every strike on a route or storage point is being watched not just for damage, but for what it says about endurance. And endurance may be the real battleground now. Can Iran keep moving weapons, keep launching, keep signaling threat, keep pressure on the region? Can the United States and its partners maintain tempo, avoid a costly widening of the war, and turn military success into strategic leverage? Can diplomacy catch up before infrastructure attacks and regional retaliation create a chain reaction nobody fully controls? Those are the questions behind the fireballs. The answer is not obvious yet. What is obvious is that this is no longer a contained exchange. Once you have heavy bombers over Iran, strikes on key routes and military-linked infrastructure, threats touching energy lifelines, and retaliation risks spreading across the Gulf, you are looking at a conflict with layers. Tactical, strategic, economic, political, psychological, and they all feed each other. That is why a single headline about B-52 strikes can be misleading if you read it too narrowly. It sounds like one event. In reality, it points to a system under pressure. A system of defense, retaliation, trade, deterrence, and survival. The explosions are the visible part. The real change is underneath. If you have made it this far, stay to the end, because the final point is the one that turns this from a military story into a warning. Here it is. The biggest consequence of all this may not be the targets already hit. It may be the new normal being created in front of us. If heavy bombers over Iran become accepted as part of regular operations, then the war has entered a different psychological era. A line that once looked extreme starts to look routine. And once something this serious starts feeling routine, escalation gets easier to justify, easier to repeat, and harder to stop. That is how wars widen without a single official announcement. Not with one dramatic speech, but with normalization. First a few strikes, then repeated waves, then bigger assets, then threats to infrastructure, then retaliation across borders, then market shock, then emergency diplomacy, then another strike because the last one did not settle it. Step by step, the extraordinary becomes ordinary. And that is why this matters right now. Because if reports of B-52 linked strikes and explosions across key areas in Iran reflect the direction of the campaign, then we are not just watching damage being done. We are watching the rules of the conflict change in real time. We are watching what happens when air dominance, strategic messaging, infrastructure pressure, and regional vulnerability all. No one should confuse that with stability. Even if one side is gaining the upper hand in the sky, the ground below remains full of ways to burn. Missiles can still fly. Drones can still slip through. Shipping can still be threatened. Energy markets can still panic. Leaders can still misread each other. And once enough systems are under stress at the same time, one bad decision can travel faster than diplomacy. So the real meaning of this moment is bigger than blast reports and bigger than one bomber platform. It is this: a war that may have once looked containable is starting to show the shape of something wider, harder, and more consequential. The bombers tell you confidence is rising on one side. The explosions tell you pressure is rising on the other. And history says that when both happen at once, the next phase is rarely calmer. That is the warning hanging over all of this. Not that one night changed everything by itself, but that one night may have revealed how much has already changed. The sky, the strategy, the risks, the threshold. Once B-52s are part of the picture, nobody can honestly pretend this is a minor flare-up anymore. This is a conflict testing how much force can be used before the entire region starts moving with it. And if that line has truly been crossed, then what comes next will not be decided by the loudest explosion. It will be decided by who still has room to escalate, who still has room to negotiate, and who realizes first that some wars do not explode all at once. They expand until the whole map feels the pressure.